Cut. Take two. Ready? Attack. Attack. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you for coming to this place that we call Natural Base for Life Holistic Arts Center. Tonight you are in for a treat. We have a special presentation by one of our foremost, I was going to say scholars, but scholars really doesn't define who he truly is. And I think over the process of tonight, you'll begin to see that it's just so much more than just scholarship. So again, thank you for coming. Be welcome in this place, and know that this is a very powerful journey that we are undertaking in this particular location that we're at. We're on a mission to enlighten our community in the same way that the sun enlightens the world. We want to be a light unto our community as well. With that, we're going to not belabor the point too much. We're going to start, as always, honoring our ancestors. And for those of you who don't know, we are now in the back of an institution that has been here for been in existence for 20 plus years, known as the African Bookstore, which is connected with an organization called Kepler Study Group, which for many of us in the community who are doing certain types of things has been one of those points of light that we were able to connect with to learn and uncover more about ourselves and really open the door and the pathway to enlightenment. So we pay homage, and we find it a real honor to be in a supportive role of that place and function. The guardian of that place, of this place, African Bookstore, has been Brother Tony Harrison. Most of you know him as Brother Koja. And he has been diligent in being a refuge for our people when the time for knowledge of who we are, knowledge of self, beckons. He is here and ready to receive. And so for that, we're going to turn it over to him as the guardian to give homage to our ancestors in our highest African fashion.
Okay. Best to welcome everyone here tonight to participate in this excursion into knowledge. I owe much of what I know to this young brother who came to our group many years ago with his dear wife and then opened our minds and put some light into our darkness. You're privileged to have the same opportunity tonight. But before he begins, our ancestors are here. They're all around you. We call it energy, they call it soul. Energy never dies. It changes form. And so the soul never dies. It just changes form. So we must ask our ancestors tonight to guide us and protect us and give us the opening of mind to accept what we're about to hear. In their names, we pour libation. Give me the name of a parent. Call the parent's name.
May.
Ashe. Another parent. Ashe. Another parent.
Alonzo.
Ashe. Another parent. Ashe. My own parents, Sarah and Marquess. Ashe. Ask their guidance and their protection and the opening of our minds to absorb information for our liberation. Thank you. Thank you, brother.
What I'm going to do now to continue with that kind of ancestral energy is to introduce a voice of an ancestor right now. For those of you who know, you'll recognize the voice. This is Avin van Sertima, and he had a short clip that a friend of mine used on his CD that addresses why we delve into history, why this search, what is this, the purpose, what's the point, as we're in the middle of Black History Month and all these things. What's really the purpose behind our engagement with these things? Is it just to celebrate something, or is it something more to it? So here's what our ancestor Avin van Sertima had to say. Let's see if we can make it audible for everybody.
My wife and I were in Egypt this summer, and I had one or two very extraordinary experiences there. One of these was looking at Aswan, looking at an obelisk. The early Africans who dominated Egypt in that period, they no longer do so now. But the early Africans had abandoned this particular obelisk. And I went down to look very closely at this obelisk because I could not understand why they could have abandoned something like this. It was huge. They must have spent a long time cutting it, and yet they had abandoned it. And I was told that it had a flaw. I looked, I saw no flaw. I went down on the ground and minutely examined it, and then I found a slight, something so slight, that you have to take a microscope to discover it. And I put my hands in the little flaw, and I traced it, and I felt such awe. And I wondered about the great distance that has occurred between that time and now, because their blacks now, many of them, had a flaw like that. Even if it were 10 inches deeper, they would have put up that obelisk. They had lost, to a large extent, many of them, the commitment to perfection, to excellence. This is what our early ancestors had. This is one of the great lessons we learned from them. That they had reached that point where they would abandon a major project like that because it had one flaw. That is the reason why they were able to build things, the only people in the world who could build things that last 5,000 years, and yet you can still see them, in spite of all the wars, the invasions, the destruction. You can go into their tombs and their temples, you could look at their pyramids, in spite of all the plundering, you have a sense of the awesome majesty of the spirit. This is what we are trying to recapture. We are not going back into the past merely as an academic exercise. We are going back into the past because we are a shattered people. But we are not a lost people, because we can find again the pieces, even as Isis searched for the pieces of Osiris. We can find again those shattered pieces and put them back together again, so that we can find once more a certain dynamic continuity and wholeness. That is what our history is about. We are going back in order to resurrect ourselves. We are going back into the past in order to remake the present so that we could go into the future with a new confidence.
I hope that gave you some insight and set perhaps a tone for this evening. If I can, I want to add just a little bit more about why I'm involved in Kemetic yoga or Egyptian yoga, why this was attracted to me, or this attracted me in this way, and why it has been my work and now it has become the work of others here that we have shared this science, this technology with, and many of you in here now are drinking from the same fountain that I drank from. And I thought it was important for us to really connect and know that we are indeed a family in this process, and we are connected. So this is one of the, I guess, statements that comes out of the work Egyptian Yoga, which is one of the, I guess, the major treatises on the fact that yogic tradition existed in Kemi. And here Dr. Ashby goes into the definition of yoga. And I want you to listen carefully at this because there's a perception that we have when we say yoga, which is pretzel. Yeah? Funny, twisting motion that somehow allows you to have power lines. And that's yoga. So I want to just, if that's the image that has been marketed to your mind, I want to counter that now with some of the work of Dr. Ashby, and let's see if we can put this into perhaps a better light. And this is what he says. The science of yoga, first of all, the science of yoga constitutes the teachings required to achieve perfection, which is the original essence of every human spirit. All right? Did you hear that? See how that plays into what? Okay. Nature herself offers one path to perfection. The path of nature, learning through mistakes and suffering, the process of trial and error, is arduous and requires many reincarnations. Through self-discipline, the path of yoga offers a shortcut to ending the pains of human existence and to exalt the pleasure, the bliss of existence by achieving self-mastery and self-realization. All right? So that's from Egyptian yoga. So now it's my job to introduce to you my teacher, and now it's the point where I don't know where to begin in that sense. But I'll attempt to do just that and do justice to what it means to be a student of the Kemetic tradition, which I hold, obviously, to be the highest spiritual system that I have found at this time. And then to be somebody who was trained to disseminate and to share that with others. Dr. Ashby now has written, how many books is it?
Somewhere around 50.
Somewhere around 50. How many of you have written 20 so far? Anybody up to 10? 5? That alone should tell you something about yoga. You know, you should know a tree by the fruit it bears, yes? Lots of fruits. So, to say the least, as a youngster years ago, when we were, and many of my counterparts were actively involved in black student organizations and different things, and we had this energy of activism and the whole fight the power type of energy, which was happening in the mid-90s and all that. Somehow it clicked inside of us that we needed some kind of spiritual foundation that we could call ours. That wasn't somebody else's image of the divine, somebody else's interpretation, because we realized that's kind of what had us confused. The other imagery and the other things had us confused. And it was the work of Dr. Ashby, particularly Egyptian yoga, and actually for me, there was a book before that that I don't see anymore called The Way of the Sage. That was just, for me, just an eye-opener in so many ways. So with that, we met at FIU, and a journey began of reconditioning everything. And when I say everything, it felt like everything. Everything we thought we knew was being reconditioned in this process. We were being constantly challenged by higher levels of teaching. And so, again, I am a product of this process. I'm a product of this family, this unit. And to me, as I said earlier, they stand as eternal pillars in our communities. We have a habit sometimes in our communities of not honoring those who have given tirelessly to us, and sometimes not even recognizing that they are there. And so we here want to begin to change that paradigm, if only a little bit, to say that we will take the time to honor, to respect, to pay homage, and to take and practice the skills that you have given us in the best way that we can, and apply it to the world around us, and in the process, create a better world. So with that, I introduce to you Sebama, Dr. Mwata Ashby, African Origins of Civilization, and Yoga Mysticism.
What's up? 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 Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the wonderful colors in this venue, and for keeping the store open for so many years. During the liberation, you said I was a young man. I was looking at the picture. It was like a picture from the 90s. They had to change the picture now. Use the same picture all these years. And thank you for playing that from Ivan Van Sertima. He's another pillar and important scholar. And we wish him well. He's taken ill in the last few years. But what I hope to do today is to give you an introduction into my work, into the Kemetic studies that I have done, and introduction to the book series, so you can get an idea of what is in them. And so that you will have a basic understanding, if not enlightenment, about the fundamental teachings of Kemetic philosophy and Kemetic yoga. And I'll ask you to hold questions, or we can maybe take a few questions as we go along. I just wanted to, because it might stretch out, because I have quite a number of slides to go. We might do questions and answers at the end. Before I begin, how many, so I can know how to kind of shape the talk, how many of you have read any of my books? Okay, that's good. How many of you have read some of the latest books? Kemetic Tree of Life is the main latest book, came out in 2008. That's one of the latest ones also. That's the Kemetic Tree of Life. That's the last major book that I've written a couple since then, but that's the last major book. Okay. First of all, so that we can all be on the same page. I know that all of you have read, most of you have read the books, but so we can all be on the same page. As far as civilizations go, we may think of the Sumerian civilization, we may think of Ghana, we may think of the Romans, we may think of Genghis Khan, we may think of so many things. But before all of that, there was Kemet. Before all of that, Kemet was already an ancient civilization before all those other civilizations came into being. And that's important for many reasons. Because in order to have an idea of the fantastic civilization that was created, we have to know of the ancientness of it. And that gives an understanding of the balance and order that was necessary to sustain for such a long time. And what was that balance, sustenance founded upon? It was the Kemetic philosophy. Now, we are told in the tradition that Asar came to Kemet, came to the land today known as Egypt, from the land of the south, which is today known as Sudan. The land that is today called Sudan was in ancient times called Kash, or later known as Kush. And by the Greeks called it Ethiopia. The land today called Ethiopia is not the ancient Ethiopia. Right? The land that's today called Sudan, that is the ancient Ethiopia. And the people who live there today were the original people from which the ancient Egyptians came. So you look at Sudanese people today, then you can get an idea of what the ancient Egyptians looked like. And they still live, you heard Ivan Van Sertima on the tape talking about Aswan. There's still a large community of people who are called Nubians. and they look like any other African peoples, just the kind of type that you find in the Nilotic region, in the Nile River Delta area. Here, the ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs of the words Kemet and Cush, or Cash. Kemet, among other things, means the black land. And it also happens that Cash has the same meaning, but it means that the land of the south, the black land of the south. So in ancient times, these two lands were actually related, actually united, just as the peoples were. They were like cousins. The Kemetians were the cousins of the Kushites, the Ethiopians. Just to give a context now in this timeline of history, the earliest evidence the only earliest physical evidence of the existence of Kemetic culture is found at 10,000 BC or earlier. And that is the earliest known developed civilization anywhere in human history. Everybody's clear on that, right? The earliest known developed civilization in human history. You may find a few things in Asia or here or there of some towns, culture, cities, but not developed civilizations. By this time, by 10,000 BC, it was already a developed civilization from even before that. And then everything else comes in after that. You have the different periods of Kemetic history, the pre-dynastic era, the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom. Then you have the Indus culture coming in, that's in India. Then you have the Aryans, you have the Minoan civilization, you have the Mesopotamians in Arabia. And then that's 10,000 BC, and then 10,000 years later, you have Christianity coming in, which was 2,000 years ago. So 10,000 years of history, Christianity, and then 2,000 years, that's where we are now, right? And this is very interesting because many people had the idea that that which is ancient is passé, meaning that it is old and useless and primitive. And that which is newer is better, modern, advanced. And so it's very interesting that when Islam and Christianity came in, especially those two, but also Judaism in a larger sense, but when Christianity and Islam came in, they had to convince people that they were the true religion. And all these things that came before, thousands of years before, were just mere like speculations of religion. That they were not real, in essence. They were just mythic. They didn't have any basis in reality, any truth. But now we have the true religion. You notice that in the Quran and the Bible, and by implication, we are told that basically this is the truth, and that basically anything that comes after this is not the truth also. Because if somebody would come along and do what they did to them, right? What they did to the other ones. And I just want to give you a context for what we're talking about. So then it became important through various means. Many of you know about the Nicene Councils, when the Roman Empire was taken over by the Christians. They used the power of the army to stamp out any followers of, and not just the ancient Egyptian religion, but any other kinds of religions that were not Orthodox Christianity, including the Gnostic Christianity that was practiced in Egypt also. Now, of course, I've written a whole book about this, talking about the origins of Christianity in the Assyrian mysteries. But that's for a different talk. I just want to give you an idea of, and a timeline of the large expanse of history that is covered. And throughout all this time of history, the Kemetic spirituality and philosophy has been practiced. And we had a civilization that had as part of its regulations to not to destroy the earth, to not be aggressive against other peoples, to protect the rights of men and women alike. This is a real civilization we're talking about. What we have now is a struggle to attain civilization. In these kind of studies, what we refer to, what we have in this culture, the United States, Europe, this is barbarism. And capitalism and imperialism is the means through which that barbarism manifests. This is not civilization. That's really what I'm getting at through this, first of all. Because your civilization has to have a foundation in truth, in ethics. And that is called Ma'at. And a civilization that's founded in truth will be able to arrive to, or to discover enlightenment. And when you go to Kemet, when you go to Egypt, that's all you really see. You go to the temples, you go to the palaces, the ancient buildings, the ancient, what remains. And you see that the quest for enlightenment either was already attained or was all that was pretty much all that the civilization was about. Everything had to do with the gods and goddesses. Everything had to do with righteousness, order, and truth, for the most part. And the biggest buildings there were the temples. The biggest buildings here are the Twin Towers. No longer, but does the essence of what they represent still here? And in other buildings and other places? That's my point. Now, this is not the only one, but this is one of the main and the most undeniable evidences of the long history of Kemetic culture. And I talked about this in the book African Origins. African Origins is a huge book that is divided into 3 parts. And in the early history part, we talked about the evidences that have been gathered related to the ancient Sphinx, the Great Sphinx, the Potomac. The water damage that is evident in the Sphinx enclosure has been found by geologists to have occurred through water erosion. Water erosion that occurs through rainfall. Now, the last time where sufficient rainfall was known to have occurred in Northeast Africa in quantity sufficient to cause this damage was 7,000 to 10,000 BC. So that means that this enclosure was in existence by that time. And how long would it take for rainfall to cut through rock? Okay. You can have a close-up over here. What we're talking about are the kind of roundish, vertical striations that the rock displays. This particular picture is in the back of the Sphinx enclosure. This is the rump of the Sphinx. The Sphinx, of course, being the symbol of the combination of the human, which is symbolized by the head, and the animal, which is the body, symbolized by the lion body. And why the lion? Because the lion symbolizes the power, the life force. And this is the head commanding the life force. This is the combination of that which is above and that which is below. This is the enlightened human being, in other words. And this this gives us the understanding that the same philosophy, and we trace it through the book, the same philosophy that you find in the beginning, or the beginning of this height, shall we say, period, you find it all the way through to the end of Kemetic culture when it was ended by the Christians. So for more than 10,000 years, you find this philosophy of enlightenment. Let me see real good now. Okay, excellent. I hope nobody falls asleep now. Okay, let's get a few other things out of the way here. Cleopatra. And the mummy movies. They have nothing to do with reality. These are fictional stories created by Hollywood to sell movies. There is no teaching of mummies coming up alive and going and killing people or strangling anyone. And the idea that everyone who was in ancient Egypt looked like Elizabeth Taylor is also a problem. While it's true that Cleopatra is part of the family of the Ptolemies from the Greeks who had taken over Egypt at that time, that does not mean that the ancient Egyptian society was Greek or looked like the Greeks. In fact, the Greeks say that also. They say as much as well. This is an actual bust of what Cleopatra looked like. Okay, who and what were the ancient Egyptians? Can anyone tell me who are the ancient Egyptians in this picture? If there are any, that is. Anybody? Nubians? Dark ones? The darker ones? Anybody else?
Question. Have you really read some people in Egypt? They said they're red. Are they really red or
The question was, we'll talk about it afterwards, but were the ancient Egyptians red? Anyone else?
All of them?
Okay, the darker ones, all of them. The ones in the front, the ones in the back.
all of them?
The one in the front.
The one in front.
All of them.
Okay, anybody else before we say?
The cows.
That's just disrespectful. Actually, the ancient Egyptians are the 5 men in front, and there are Nubians. Actually, there's one in the back, 2 in the back also, and the small child, the small one in the middle. The 2 towards the back with the feather, those are Nubians. But what do you notice about the Nubians and the Kemetans?
Yeah.
The hair
What are their similarities?
and they got
Okay, the same colors. That's the point of this picture. This picture occurs in the tomb of a governor, ancient Egyptian governor of Nubia, called Hui. And these are some princes in the front, and princes in the back, also Nubian princes that bring homage. They're bringing offerings to him. And you know that there are differences by the clothing, by the headdress. That is, you can't know the differences by just the skin colorations, because there are some darker, some are a little lighter brown like we are here, right? Some are more charcoal black, right?
How do you explain the different colors?
Excuse me?
How do you explain the different skin colors?
No, how do you explain the different skin colors now?
I mean, Well, we can talk about the oppressor and what he did. So I
Excuse me?
I said we could talk about what the oppressor did, but I'm saying at that time, they lived in the same region, and
Yeah.
what more about if they lived in the same, the
Well,
sun, the pigmentation?
the ancient Egyptians in Northeast Africa had communications with the Libyans. They had communications with people in Mesopotamia also.
So race mixing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was not even thought of as race mixing back then either. There was no concept of race in that sense. Everybody knows that?
Yeah.
Or should we discuss that?
I think so. That's heavy work.
In ancient times, there was no concept of race. Of that, this concept of the ethnicity. You know, these are the Libyans over here. These are the Mesopotamians. These are the Cushites over there. And we're all, different groups of people. But there's not this sense that we are different classes of beings. That whites are different from blacks. Right? Or that Chinese people are some other race somewhere out there. We're different. We're all human beings, in other words. And there are actual statements from the Kemetic sages and the pharaohs acknowledging this. Acknowledging also the ubiquity of religion also. They acknowledge that the religion of Kemet is the same one that's being followed in other lands under different names. We're calling it different names. They didn't say, oh, this is our true religion, this is the only religion, everybody else is going to hell. They never said that. But staying with the concept of a race, that there's some genetic difference between whites and blacks, or between the blacks and Asians, is nonsense. That is a construction of modern culture for the purpose of perpetuating a social, political, economic agenda based on racism. And so there's nothing wrong with acknowledging ethnic differences, varieties, the spice of life, all that kind of thing. There's a problem with affirming this concept of racism, because immediately it has to be supported by some other concept of different, better than, higher than, all these kinds of things that allow people to enslave others, allow people to mistreat others, and everything that we know that follows from there. In fact, also in the United States, at the beginning of the United States, this concept of racism did not exist either. It was a development that was to support the philosophy and social, cultural, political agenda. But now it has become more of a social disease that cannot go away. Because people keep on believing it from the time of their birth, and they keep on passing it on. And the absolute proof of this is that if you have different species, if human beings were different species, it would actually make you a different class or a different race of being. Then you would not be able to mate with a Chinese person. You would not be able to mate with an Asian person. Whites would not be able to mate with blacks, and so on and so forth. That would be like saying that cats can mate with dogs. And those are two separate things. Human beings are not like that. There's only one human species on Earth, Homo sapiens sapiens. That's it. And at one time, there was a different class of human beings, as they're called. They were Neanderthals. And they're gone. Apparently, the Homo sapiens killed them all, especially in Europe. Homo sapiens won out. You have a question?
No, I was just going to try to answer his, because I'm studying psychology, so I do a lot of research too for my papers, and I just wanted to say that the darker skin is from melanin, the melanin that, we produce, and it causes a richness, vitamin.
Right. That's usually where there's a lot more sun, that's from my understanding. It's a protection.
Right. The bears actually get into a little bit more. And we haven't.
And the lighter color is from albinism. That's a genetic trait, that a gene of no color that is carried by some Africans. I mean, some dark-skinned people have a gene that has with no color. And when a man with a gene of no color marries a woman with one gene, and it's only one. It only takes one gene, and the genes match up, you're going to have an albino child. There are many families who are dark, who have a dark-skinned husband and dark-skinned wife who have albino children. Their children look like, white people. They have blue eyes or green eyes or hazel eyes. Those color eyes are non-color. They call that a non-color, eye color, and their skin is called a non-color. But they can, as they grow, their hair darkens to yellow, from white to yellow, and their skin might take on a little bit of a creamier complexion from the sun. But they can, bleach their hair or perm it and pass this, and the trait for straight hair is called flaxen hair, and many albinos are born with flaxen hair. Some are born with, more nappy hair, but many are born with flaxen hair. So there you have, they're just people. We're all just people. It's not that.
Well, there are two processes going on. What the sister says is correct in respect to the issue of albinism. But what I was talking about was more of, and I talked about it in the African origins. It's been documented by some scientists, at least European scientists, that the process, there's a natural process of lightening of the skin. It is acknowledged now that all human beings who are alive on Earth today, wherever they may live, their ancestors came from Africa. That has been acknowledged. Now, how to explain the process by which they change color then? And it's been found that through a process of the geography and the amount of sunlight that is received in a particular area, that over a period of 20,000 years, the skin, the melanin content of the skin changes also to allow for certain reception of sunlight to create vitamin D and many other things. So the idea that, see, that this is part of the problem, or it has been part of the problem with many who seek to enlighten themselves, or to bring to how shall we say, urge the community to action. They have done so by trying to stir up animosity against the oppressors, animosity against the other group that is seen in totality as a racial type. So therefore, the one who's been abused and mistreated accepts this same concept of racism in order to attack the oppressor. And so what again is that many people have, especially as through the 80s and 90s, there was this idea that we have to, and of course before that, the concept of white people are devils, and we have to, and all white people are bad, and how many of you have white people in your family or related? Which one, or how many of you have been mixed from being part slave and on a plantation, your ancestors? And which part of yourselves are you going to hate for being white? You see the insanity of that. And the insanity of that, human beings have a funny capacity to overlook the insanity of things and follow them anyway. Which brings us to a lot of trouble in society. In many ways, in religion, in many cultural ways, in many ways. What's supposed to happen is that insanity, your recognition of insanity is supposed to make you think, what the hell is going on here? That doesn't make sense. So let me find the real answer. Let me find what's really going on. And what the real problem is a problem of ethical understanding, ethical culture, ethical behavior, ethical philosophy. And the more you allow your life and your community and your family to be affected and to be in agreement with these concepts and ideas, these negative concepts, these fallacious concepts, the more you actually perpetuate as well the problem. Because your reciprocal expression of ignorance allows others to perpetuate it as well. And it fuels the fears and the animosities of others as well from the other side. And then the political, the unscrupulous, and also the psychopathic, because there are many sociopathic people in government who don't give a damn about resolving any issues of society, or they'll use racism and they'll use these things to stir up strife and to stir up animosity, so they can be in power and they can gain support against other people, and they can carry on imperialism while you're fighting amongst yourselves. You're fighting for a little piece of land here, and I'm saying this is it. I'm saying people are fighting in the ghetto for land or for a little piece of something, while the whole system stays intact. Because people are not fighting against the system. You know, they're trying to start something with this Tea Party thing, but they're being taken over by the corporatists and everyone else too. And the racists and everyone else. They're trying to get into that too. So, but let's, any further questions about that? Let's move on.
What about the concept of the indigenous people that were here before the Europeans, and they came and they said they speak this folk tongue?
What about them?
Yeah, I mean, the light-skinned peoples that did make quest invade and run in other countries to whatever the reason was for, if it was for spices or whatever, but they did a tremendous amount of damage to a lot of indigenous peoples, and that type of mentality, that psychosis wasn't in existence back in those days.
What do you mean, that type of psychosis?
The Europeans, the indigenous people say they speak with forked tongues. They came and they slaughter and they kill everybody.
Right, so what's your point about that?
Well, in terms of accepting them as part of you, or you are part of them.
I'm not sure what your point is. In terms of accepting what?
Well, you was talking about the whole concept of the human spirit, as us in communion with each other and accepting each other. That's at a higher level, but when they came, when the Europeans came, they didn't come and accept the people as human spirits and all.
Right, so that's a fact. But what about that? What do you mean? Or what's your point about that?
My point is that that's something that have continued to evolve today because of the manifestation of things that they have done and the energy they created in terms of societies. There's a lot of people feeling oppressed by that type of energy, and they don't have a body of information to guide them through that process, so they're responding in like mind. Like, for instance, the Arabs are responding because they felt oppressed for many, many years.
Right.
There's a lot of people also are responding in that like manner. So
okay,
you
so
don't get that kind of peace that you're talking about today unless people get that knowledge so they can overcome all those type of insecurities.
So that's what I was saying, that as long as that ignorance remains, both the victim as well as the one who is also the victimizer, who's also a victim as well,
Right.
that will continue as long as that ignorance remains. Because when the ignorance stops existing, then the victims can rebuild themselves and create a real civilization that will be powerful enough to not allow that victimization to exist. As long as the ignorance continues, you know, the taking away, you know, the reason why it's important for us to talk about these things. The ignorance that we're talking about is specifically the ignorance that this is your culture, first of all. The ignorance about the fact that you have a teaching of enlightenment. You have a religious process that is grander and that is more powerful than anything that exists today. Ignorance about the fact that you have an ethical system that will strengthen you and then will lead you to wealth and for the community and power. All of that has been lost, or shall we say, forgotten. because of what has been done through history. So yes, and as long as that ignorance continues, the situation will continue as well. That was my point. The point about the Native Americans, we talked about before that. My point of talking about the fact that all human beings are the same is not to say that Europeans, when they came in, destroying and pillaging and raping, all kind of stuff, is excused. I'm talking about the fact of the unity of humanity. That's what I was talking about. If Europeans have forgotten that, if they do evil things and so on, that's a separate point. That's an ethical and social political point. It's based in a psychological state of ignorance and psychosis. We can't say that also, I think. But I was not excusing what was done. But what was done to Africans, enslaving Africans, raping them, making them into mulattoes, whatever, none of those things change the fact that human beings are the same, that there are no different races. You follow what I'm saying? Yeah. And anybody who tries to continue saying that in order to rally black people or Native Americans against whites, whatever, that will ultimately fail because it's based on truth. That was my point.
Another point is also certain things serve a purpose. The cultural aspect. It serves a purpose to a point. Many of you have gone through like Afrocentricity, and it allowed you to get to Kemetic mysticism. So for you, it was your entry into it, and so it serves a purpose at a certain point. But at some point, then to get to the higher, you have to kind of be able to let go of the lower. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to negate that and say that's bad and we shouldn't, even the anger serves a purpose. It gets people who are home, sitting on the sofa, vegging out, watching TV. It gets them off of the sofa, gets them to go to a rally. So it serves a certain purpose. But then in the spiritual field, we talk about sublimation of that energy. So you have to learn how to transform it and to allow it to dissipate so that you can get to the higher spiritual awareness. Otherwise, you're not going to evolve spiritually. And then the other thing is within our Kemetic philosophy, as Dr. Ashby has indicated, if you know your Kemetic mysticism, you also understand about Uhem Ankh, or reincarnation. That's a part of it, and that's something else that you have to sort of accept. And reincarnation does not occur along, if you want to use the term racial or ethnic lines. In other words, you don't only reincarnate as an African person in this life, next life, and that next life. So those who you're seeing as so-called Europeans, or those who are seen as so-called Africans, that is not their every lifetime. Their souls coming into different bodies for different experiences. So that's why you ultimately have to look at what is what is truth. And yes, you judge people according to truth. And so if a certain European American person is doing something that's unjust, that's how they have to be evaluated. But then that also applies to African American people as well too. You have to judge them also according to their actions, according to truth, because that's how Ma'at judges them. So there's a level of understanding you can have that is cultural, that's societal, that is practical reality, the world of time and space as you function in it. Obviously, as a person incarnated into an African type of body in this world, you are going to, regardless of if you are an enlightened person or you're not, and you're going to go certain places and you're going to experience racism. Sedama experiences racism, and they don't see through to his spirit. A person who is unenlightened, they're not going to see through and say, oh, he's this, elevated being and let's bow down to him. No, they see him as a black person and they'll be just as racist to him as they would to the next person. So you do have to, there are certain places, we may not go, into a bar of, but so the practical reality is still uphold. But spiritual reality is a higher reality for your inner growth, and it also does express outwardly as well too. But you have to balance it according to the world around you and your intellect as well too. So.
I like to say, I think that's true, and that's the ethics. But what's missing is the understanding of karma, and how that is the method, the process for bringing about justice, and I think that's what people want, you know.
Well, I guess there's a general saying that I've heard, you know, in the African American community that says, let go and let God. And in a way, that is the ultimate aspect of Ari, or what in the Indian system is called karma, in our system is called Ari. And in that, ultimately, no one gets away with anything. Whether it's seen, not seen, whether it's, it may not be in this lifetime the persons get caught. You know, people that all of a sudden go to jail in this lifetime for years when they supposedly did nothing in this lifetime. That's past Ari, that is coming forth, and, you know, at the same time, people working to get them out of jail because they haven't done anything in this lifetime is also their Ari coming to aid them. So but nothing goes unpunished, nothing goes unrewarded, so it always works out into the karma or the Ari of that person.
I wonder, Sister, why Jewish brothers and sisters wouldn't want to let go of whole cause.
Pardon me?
I said, I wonder why our Jewish brothers and sisters, those that are in power in this country, would never say what we just heard, that they would never forget the whole cause.
Well, if someone is teaching, I haven't been into where they teach about the Kabbalah, but that is what they're supposed to, because they
That's what they're supposed to do, actually.
Right, and when they're teaching about Kabbalah. Now, Judaism, like Christianity, like everything else, that's Orthodox religion. And the issue with Orthodox religion is that they don't have that component of mysticism. And if you don't have that component of mysticism, you're practicing an incomplete form of religion that is going to be very limited, and hence we're going to have all these conflicts and wars because everybody's asserting their own true religion. So when you get into the mystical level, the authentic practice of mysticism, you have to let go of that to be able to attain spiritual enlightenment. So you have to be able to let go of it. Culturally, it serves a purpose. There's nothing wrong with having culture. Culture is supposed to facilitate souls to get to this. So whether, you know, it's African culture, Kemetic culture, the Buddhism have their Buddhist culture, and the Indians have their Buddhist culture, they have their Buddhist philosophy. You have the Hinduism and the yoga sciences and Vedanta philosophy. If your affiliation, if your inner Ari, your karma, has led you more to connect with something African, you have Shetan Enter for that. And you know, that is what we want to bring you, that we don't hear of wonderful philosophy. When you think of mysticism and high spiritual philosophy, like at FRU, whenever they have their lectures, they have the Buddhist person there, they have the Sufi person there, they have, you know, someone from the Indian doing, you know, yoga, but you never have the African Kemetic priest there as well.
Because African people don't demand it.
Right.
Correct.
Because they don't have the understanding, they're not supporting, that's what I was getting at. That's what I was getting at. If they're not supporting it, they don't have the ethics. Because otherwise they should demand it, and they should be fighting for it. Okay? Yeah. Sounds like an important discussion that should be continued. But it's something I think that you need to get into by degrees to understanding. And as it was said, I think when you begin to have the understanding of the concept of Ari and Uema, karma and reincarnation, what Venus called karma and reincarnation, you are better equipped to let go of the act, because you want to somehow redress the injustices that were done. You somehow want justice to be seen, justice to be done, and you want the other ones to suffer, things like that. But you also have to understand that there's a whole world process that is dealing with that as well. It's not just you. And if you have understanding, then you're better able to let go and let the world do its thing. And then you can attain your power that you need to have to elevate yourself and protect yourself, protect your family, your community, and so on and so forth. If enough people were able to do that, imagine what would happen. The society, the culture, the subculture would be impervious to those pressures anymore. It would be able to sustain itself, it would be able to cooperate with itself and to build itself up, all those kinds of things. So we're still at kind of like a stage one. Sad to say. After 30 years plus of Afrocentrism, we're still trying to get it together. That's just the truth apparently of where things are. You know, we should be able to hook up with other groups. Even the Kemetic followers are separate in their ways of following Kemet. You'll find that too. And they think they have to follow it in the kind of orthodox way. So theirs is better enough. So there's a lot of work to be done. Here's a picture on the top right-hand side of a typical gentleman you will find running boats in Aswan. It's the same area that Ibn Circle was talking about. This is in the southern part of Egypt, the southernmost part. And he is what they refer to as a Nubian. Of course, today, everyone is Muslim. Because, you know, in this sense, Islam doesn't allow any other, it doesn't really coexist with other religions. And so basically they all see themselves they see themselves culturally as Arabs, and they also see themselves ethnically, I guess. They wouldn't necessarily say this way, but from talking to them, this is what I feel is that they see themselves as ethnically Nubian and culturally, although I think the lines blur there as well. For more on this subject of culture and ethnicity, I urge you to see the book Comparative Mythology. I'm not sure if we have any copies here, but on that book, I did good. And that book and the latest one, Matrix of African Proverbs, I went for those subjects, those issues. But I want to show you, this is what an ancient Egyptian person looked like. The same kind of this is a larger picture so you can see a bit. And as far as the question of the one of the evidences and the images on the tombs and other places, the temples, demonstrate that people have different. Actually, when images were created in a naturalistic way, or versus an idealistic way, there are two different kinds of art that we're talking about now. The idealistic one is more the one that was used for interpreting religious and spiritual philosophy. You find it a lot in the temples. A lot of the tombs you find more naturalistic. Naturalistic means as it actually was in life. Idealistic means how we would like it to be, or how we're trying to express some ideas or philosophy in a higher understanding. You follow the difference? In the idealistic images, you might find women depicted as white. You might find men depicted as red. Not that people, the ancient Egyptians, were actually white and red. Think about it. If men were red and white and women were white, you'd get pink children, right? There were no pink children that we know of. This is an idealistic interpretation of a spiritual philosophy related to colors. So you can have also women as yellow, and that leads us into a different study of the colors and what they mean and their combinations and so on. I talked about it in the book. But here also, one of the devices used to differentiate people in perspective is the different shades also. You notice how the different shades are done intermittently. You know, we have one darker one, one light one, one darker one, light one. So you can tell the differences between them.
What about the features, brother? I was under the impression our people had, thicker lip, more broad nose.
That's not true.
That's not true. Okay, so this is ideal. This is realistic, not idealistic.
See, because you have, they try to give you a modern kind of example. The people of Southern Europe versus the people of Northern Europe look different. The people of Southern Europe have darker hair, darker eyes, swarthier skin. The ones in the North are more blonde, more blue-eyed, more pale, right? And they're all European, right? So why shouldn't we expect to find that there are different appearances in Northeastern versus Western Africans?
Chinese look like Chinese, Japanese look like Japanese. What I know now, I'm not.
But there are
Actually, there are
some
differences.
Asians.
There's differences, but I'm saying feature. I'm asking about the features.
But there are some Asians, their features, they look like Africans.
Like Africans too.
Yeah, they look like Africans.
And yet they're still
Big
Asian.
nose
But so I'm getting is that you can have a person who is like the person you just saw before. This person here, who is just as dark as the person you find in shall we say, in Botswana, or on the west side of Africa, in Ghana State. But the physiognomy is not necessarily going to be the same. Physiognomy is like the facial features specifically. The nose is not going to be so broad like ours necessarily, or you're going to have straighter features. But they're still culturally related anyway. We have evidences of confluence between the Western Africans and the Northeastern Africans and the Southern Africans. But then this is what is called the Nilotic type of physiognomy. People who live along the Nile or that valley, all the way from the Mediterranean going into the Sudan. You find that they look like this. They're tall, kind of tall in a way, thinner features, things like that.
I didn't understand the point you were making about the yellow, the red. I didn't understand.
I was saying that in the tombs, you have more of a naturalistic style of art, where people were actually depicted the way they actually were in life. Now, in the temples, you have a different kind of idealistic art, where people are depicted in relation to philosophical issues and to spiritual dimensions that relate to the colors. And that's why they're depicted in red and white and yellow also.
So they didn't really actually exist?
They didn't really actually exist. They were depicted that way.
Wow.
Like for instance, this was done also the same kind of idealistic images were found in the Minoan society also that Egypt was related to. These were the pre-classical Greeks, but that's a different story. I talk about it in the book. And there's color pictures in the book if you want to see them also, I believe. For instance, you'll find that and I talk about this specifically instance in the book, African Origins. I guess he almost had enlightenment too. In his next life, he's going to come back as a mouse, maybe as a dog, and then next day after that, there's a roach running around. There's a pharaoh, I can't remember his name right now. It's in the book. He's a Greek pharaoh, and he's depicted as red. So are we going to have Greeks in the time of Cleopatra, which we know that they were European, pale skin. He's been depicted as red. And then you have another pharaoh who was, we know he was related to a family from Nubia. So we know what the Nubians look like. So we have a Nubian and a European, a Greek, being depicted as red. What does that tell us about the color red? Were the Greeks red and the Nubians were red too? The idea is that the male in this context is being depicted as red, as being transformed into a higher order of being, a higher, he has attained enlightenment in this context, let's put it that way. The females being depicted as white or yellow also. The combination of the two has certain meaning related to enlightenment. So the colors relate to an idealistic interpretation, idealistic formation. I talked about it in the book, so you go back for details. But there were no yellow and white people or yellow people in Greece or in Africa. That's an idealistic interpretation. Okay? Everybody's clear there, right? And I specifically, there are a lot of color pictures in this book too. I don't know if you have any here. There should be. who was the founder of Nectarianism? First of all, what is Nectarianism? Nectarianism is our modern word that we use to describe ancient Egyptian religion in the context of world religions of today. You have Christianity, you have Buddhism, you have Hinduism, well, you have Nectarianism, the ancient African religion that other people have followed. And the reason why we call it Nectarianism, it is an ism related to Neter. And Neter is the name that was given to the Supreme Divine. And Neter does not have a gender context related to it necessarily. It is an androgynous kind of idea of spirituality. It's kind of like the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, which is nondescript. It's a gender kind of idealistic concept of spirituality. And so it is a religion related to Neter. And now the ancient name, we're going to show it later, ancient glyphs, about the ancient Egyptian religion, call it Shetat Neter. Shetat means hidden, something secret. And Neter means the divine. So the religion, the name of the religion is the hidden divine. Or we call it the way of the hidden divine. Or the mysteries of the divine. Right? And the mythic founder of Nectarianism is Lord Khepri. And Khepri is the personality all the way to your left. And we know that he is Khepri because he has the headdress of a scarab. Scarab is Khepri. Khepri means creator. And he brought the world into existence. In this particular, there are several creation stories, creation myths, creation traditions, and this is the main one. This is the earliest one. Right? I'm trying to go through many things to give you a context, but I don't want you to get confused. Excuse me? Can you? This is the Anunian tradition. Correct. And the Anunian tradition means that is the tradition that was brought forth by the priests and priestesses of the city of Anu. So we call it the Anunian tradition. There is also a Theban tradition. There's also a Memphite tradition. There is also a goddess tradition. But there are about 4 or 5 main traditions. And this is the earliest one, the main one, and pretty much out of which all the other ones come out of. We're told that and you'll find actually that this particular teaching is actually found in India also. The god Vishnu, and the god Brahma, Vishnu and Shiva. It's the same concept, the same idea that's brought forward. And I talked about this in the book, where the god is here sleeping on a serpent. You find the same serpent in India. The same story, thousands of years later, you find it being replicated. The Khepri is laying on the great serpent, which this is a giant serpent. And he's coiled up, he has 5 heads. His name is Ashahra, which means many-faced one. And when Khepri decides to create creation, he divides himself into 3 forms of flesh, 3 forms of body, and that's what we have. The 3 pieces of flesh are at his feet. The 3 pieces of flesh transform into the 5, and the 5 creates the multiplicity of everything that we see here today. And through the movement of that serpent, the serpent is now moving, it is coiled up in the ocean. The movement of that serpent creates waves. The waves turn into different forms. And those forms are what we see today as the elements. Air, water, fire, earth. And from there, all the other ones, the metals, the stars, the planets. Space itself is actually not void, it's actually a physical construct. So everything that you can perceive. In fact, the very stuff that your mind is made of that creates thoughts, or allows you to think, is created of this creative stuff. The created is called Nu, the primeval ocean. Primeval ocean is on form until this serpent starts through the force of spirit, which is Kepri, acts upon it. And then it comes into being.
I was just going to ask you, Dr. Ashford, if that in many other ways also is symbolic and representative of the serpent being the Kundalini creative energy, and the primordial ocean being like the dark matter or the ethers of existence, and that creative force combined with that etheric dark matter, or the primordial waters, then that manifests into what we see as physical reality. With those two forces joining together.
I think that's a fair comparison, although there are some nuances of difference that might be important. But I think that's, for our particular venue right now, I think that's a fair comparison. And that's a good comparison. Yes, indeed. And that is this teaching you find later in the Genesis, with God hovering over the waters, Genesis, and bringing forth creation, and you find it in the Ruach of the Jews. You find this kind of idea rippling through history, but here you find it at the beginning.
Brother, as a Christian, you've been raised a Christian. Serpent is synonymous with Satan in the Christian religion. That's not so from what you're saying, correct?
That's right. There are no serpents or devilish serpents in the context of Christianity that you find in Kemet. You find what you do find is the concept of Apep. Apep also manifests as a serpent. A serpent of chaos, a serpent that tries to tear down the creation of Ra. And Ra is the next form of Kepri that we haven't gone into yet. Kepri is the creator, and we have Ra, who is the sustainer. And we have Tem, who is the dissolver. Now, once Kepri brings creation into being, then Ra takes over and he sustains it. He sustains the creation in motion by sailing through the waters and continuing the ripples, continuing the waves. And what is working against him is friction, and that is Apep, the force that tries to stop things, the force that tries to bring things, created things back down to the ground, and things like that. But there's no evil in the context of a Christian kind of devil in Kemetic culture. What there is a ignorance and lack of ethics that creates error, and it creates unrighteousness. Isfa. That is what you have in the Kemetic culture. If you think about it, if you have this ideal or this concept that like in Christianity, because I grew up as a Catholic, so I kind of know one or two things about Christianity. You have this idea that there's a devil, and that the earth is the realm of the devil. And so God, think about it, God is stepping into the realm of the devil. So the devil can have at you, and can be constantly poking you, and constantly trying to entice you into things, and entice you to go to hell, and all those kinds of things. It's a kind of a psychopathic, how shall we say? It's a form of insanity. It's a form of religion based on insanity. The insanity that you are part of this struggle between God and the devil.
So and that's correct in Christianity and everything else.
Excuse me?
So are you saying that kineticism, and I may be saying it wrong, but you said kineticism is correct and Christianity, Judaism, Islam, everything else is wrong?
I'm saying that religions that follow an orthodox program of polarizing spiritual energy into good and evil.
Isn't that what kineticism does as well?
No, it does not polarize spiritual energy. It polarizes, shall we say, if anything. It doesn't really polarize this either. Because at opposite ends you have spirit and you have matter. In this context, that spirit is in its original form, and you have matter that is coagulated spirit. Matter has forgotten that it is spirit also. So it acts individually, it acts selfishly, it acts hatefully, it acts,
In Christianity, we call it the flesh. In Christianity, we say the flesh.
Right, but it's not because of the devil, it's because of error.
Right.
Okay. You follow? And Christianity would be the devil's making you do it, like Smith Wilson used to say, devil made me do it, devil made me do it. But in our context, it is error. But Christianity has personified that error into an evil being that is a counter God, a kind of philosophical image. But think about it. If that is the case, that you have an opposite to God, then that means that your God is not the absolute truth. Because if you can have an opposite to it, it can only be an absolute if there's only one. Because otherwise we're going to say, so then we can come and say philosophically, you have the God and the devil, and they're struggling. What if another bigger God comes in and knocks them both out of the water?
So I guess my question would be, what causes unrighteousness in medicine?
Error.
Error. Whether you say error or we say Satan, it's
called Kemen. No, Kemen, ignorance is not the same as the devil. The devil is an ideal of a willing and knowing act of unrighteousness.
Right.
So what I'm getting at is that if you, what we refer to as evil is a person who knows that what they're doing is wrong and they want to do wrong and they're happy doing wrong, happy hurting, for whatever reason, either they're psychotic or sociopathic or whatever. That's what we context as evil. Person who does evil unknowingly is out of ignorance. If they become wise and they start saying, "Oh, I hurt you, I'm sorry, let me redress that," that's something else.
But also the idea of the devil is something that is outside of yourself that is compelling you. So if something outside of yourself, then you cannot, you're always susceptible to it. And also you don't have to take responsibility for it. You don't have, because essentially you can say, it wasn't me, it was the devil that made me do it. Therefore you don't look at yourself to see the error in your ways necessarily, because there's some force outside of you. Even like in the Kemetic mysticism, when you have a picture of Heru, the divinity Heru, there's one, actually, I don't know if Sibama has it here, of Heru, and then it shows you Set. Set is the counterpart, supposedly, like, I guess some people relate Set to the devil or the negative counterpart. But actually, there's a picture of Smite Heru Set, which is a picture of Heru, and then there's a picture of Set. Actually, it's called He Who Has Two Faces. Heru has two faces, because Heru is there, and then they show you Set's head coming out of Heru. The idea, it's not a separate being. Set is not outside. Set is that aspect of yourself that is that forgetfulness of yourself. And therefore, you're not like even destroying Set, you're just remembering your true essence, and kind of Set, this egoism vanishes as you remember your true essence. So there's not something outside of you. The whole process of enlightenment is actually this, a remembering or a discovering of your true essence that you already are now. So you're not creating, you're not becoming, you're actually just like remembering.
Right.
Just like rediscovering.
And then you say.
That's what I did. Let me take that idea further, and, or to bring it really home. What Scott is saying is that if you, see, because we haven't gone there yet in our discussion, but ultimately what this teaching is about is reaching what is called a state of nihas, or enlightenment, what the Buddhists would call enlightenment. And enlightenment means that you have discovered the true essence of your being, which is one with the universe, which is one with creation, one with everything. And what that means, that has to mean necessarily, is that you are discovering that you are God, that you are divinity.
An expression of God.
And in the Orthodox religion, you cannot have that. Because God exists, in fact, sitting on a throne somewhere watching over you, as the devil has at you, and saying, we're going to punish you, when you come to hell. And so there, these opposites are always, you're always separated, and you can never discover your true essence. And once you discover that, there is no God and no devil in this dualistic concept of the term. There is only one transcendental divine.
And if you're asking about different traditions, like is Kemetic mysticism the only mystical teachings? No. Any religion that has an authentic mystical system is just as effective to take you towards spiritual enlightenment. For some people, they find it through Buddhism. For some people, they find it through Sufism. For some people of the Jewish faith, they may find it through Kabbalism. Some people may find it Christianity through Gnosticism, which is Gnostic Christianity.
So there's more than one way.
There's not more than one way. There's more than one traditions that lead you to the same spiritual path of mysticism. Mysticism is basically that mechanism where you engage in the different disciplines, meditation, and other spiritual practices to attain that state of enlightenment that in Buddhism may be called nirvana, in Kemetic mysticism may be called nihas. So,
but in the case of the
kingdom of God in Christianity, or right. But the main thing is that
overcome the devil, so to speak, or evil, or your lower nature.
You have to overcome yourself.
You have to.
Let's call it the lower self. Let's call it the lower self.
You see
there's no devil in Kemetic philosophy.
Well, what does that represent that Kepri has in his left hand?
It's the Uwa scepter, which is
and it has a connection with
Set.
With Set. And you're stepping forward on the left, which is indicative that you have overcome. You have that in your hand.
Well, yes. Among other things, it means that you are stepping with your left, that you are bringing forth your right brain. You're bringing forth the enlightenment, the holistic vision. Yes, all those kind of things. And you're holding this.
And through that, you have overcome Set.
Right. Again, you hold the powers, that you control the powers. So what is through the what?
The Book of Innocence is. When was that written? It's in relation to
the Book of Innocence. I'm not familiar with that particular.
Book of Innocence, the Book of the Dead.
Oh, the Book of the Dead, yes. The Purgatory. The Purgatory was in its current form.
Coming forth by day, but it's the Book of Innocence, and it has all the confessions,
right,
which brings me to my next question or thought, is that many of the religions had to have come out of, the ancient Egyptian religion, because it's similar to, because I was baptized Catholic at 8 days old, so all my life I have known about confessions, and when I started reading it, I'm like, this reminds me. And then for a while, I was in Opus Dei, where they do formation, and they read a lot of, the laws, which some of them are just seemingly copied right out of, the Book of the Dead. And my other thought was with Akhenaten, was he more of a founder of the Judaism, or Muslim, because he was the first to say he only believed in one God, and he, you know, he went out of Egypt, you know, and took a bunch of people with him just, you know, to practice his own religion, because he said that this religion had too many gods, and he wanted to practice.
Don't keep going.
That's what I wanted to throw that in.
No, don't keep going. Hopefully, I've got a little bogged down in some things lately, but hopefully the next couple of years we'll have a book coming out on optimism. Although if you want the lecture series that is available now, lecture series that I did many years ago on optimism, and the hieroglyphic text that Akhenaten himself wrote. This interpretation of Akhenaten as some kind of a heretic, as some kind of a non-believer in ancient Egyptian religions, and he has a good God, all that is nonsense. That is a modern interpretation based on Western Orthodox religious culture, which does do that. Our God is the only God, and our religion is the only one. Nothing else exists. Nothing else ever is good. Ours is the only one, and that's it. Akhenaten never said that. In fact, he acknowledged the opposite, that other religions are as. And this is see, how do you think that the different traditions of Kemet came into being to begin with? First of all, you have the Anunian tradition, based on Ra. Then you have the Memphite tradition, based on Ptah. Then you have the Theban tradition, based on Amun. How do you think that, the point is that there is no evidence, either in Akhenaten's time, or in the time of the emergence of Memphite theology or Theban theology, that these were somehow different or somehow better, or there are different ways of practice. It's like the same thing as us seeing how we would look at the Buddhists, or we would look at the Taoists, or we would look at the Native Americans, Native American spirituality, whatever. There are just different ways, different pathways to the same. And with the same thing that Akhenaten did, he brought forth a new. It wasn't really new, because Aten existed even from the pre-dynastic era. It is that he elevated it. Just like at a different time, Ptah was elevated and Amun was elevated. So all those things are incorrect. He did not have any relation to the Jews. The Jews came much later.
I know. That's
he
what I'm saying.
didn't bring forth monotheism.
He did not bring forth monotheism either. He didn't, that was not part of his philosophy. The concept of the Aten is a pathway into the divine, is a symbol, and that's what he brought forth, is that concept of devotion through the Aten, and that's what he elevated. So.
You want to explain henotheism?
Excuse me?
Henotheism.
Okay, so without saying, to discuss the concept of, first of all, before we get to henotheism, let's get into the concept, the idea of theism. Theism is the belief in a God. You're a theist. You believe in a God.
Turn on the lights.
If you believe that there is one God, then we call you a monotheist.
Let me set that goal.
Mono, meaning one. Believe in many gods, they call you a polytheist. Now, as a society develops, usually the development is to discover an ultimate divine, and that is what we might see as a we might call that pantheism, where it's pan, it's all over. But if we say a concept even higher than that, might say that God is everywhere and everything, and also transcending creation as well, transcending the physical. That's panentheism.
But I grew up as a Catholic with
the monotheism.
No, but with pantheism, because that's the way I was taught.
A Catholic with pantheism?
That's the way I was taught. It was
Where was that? I must know where that was.
My dad used to read every Sunday the Baltimore Catechism. And that was
Which one?
Every Sunday.
Which one, sir?
The Baltimore Catechism. Every Sunday. God is everything, and everything is God. Every Sunday. Maybe he was just
but that's
saying it
different
wasn't
than what
written in there,
that's what we would refer to. That's what we would refer to as Gnosticism.
And that's when I started reading your book.
Gnosticism. Gnostic.
I started saying, wow, this.
Because what I'm getting at the differentiation is that you're saying that, and I'm acknowledging that you're saying that, and I'm not detracting anything that you're saying. But the only point I would make is that that is not the official church
Everything of
doctrine. It's not the doctrine of either the Catholic Church or the Orthodox Protestant churches. That is something on the fringe of anything, something separate. And that's akin to the philosophy of the Gnostics, which came before the Catholics. So, but I don't want everybody to come here and say, and think, oh, she's saying that Christians have the same. No. If your father did that, if your group did that, that's something separate and wonderful. It could be wonderful and great. Okay? So anyway, going on with our understanding, the concept then that you can have a supreme being, but also you can have other smaller, lesser beings that work with the supreme being. That's called henotheism. You have a supreme being, and then you have gods and goddesses that work and that do locally, do different things. And then you have a pathway to actually discover the supreme being. The supreme being doesn't get temples. Why? Because the supreme being is beyond even words, beyond descriptions. You cannot quantify, you cannot qualify, you cannot create a form that, and this is a recognition. This is called the God without a name, the nameless divinity. That's what it's called. And you have the same concept in India called Brahmana. You have it in different traditions, but not in the Western Orthodox traditions. Western Orthodox traditions, you have a specific, concrete idea of what the God is. Sitting on the throne, watching over the creation, and the God is separate from creation. In the henotheism and the pantheism, God is part of the creation. In fact, creation is part of the body of God.
And Janice, they believe that when you die, your spirit comes back as something like a butterfly, like you die happy.
Well, you're going back into the concept of reincarnation. That's a little different now. That's something separate. Everybody's clear on the concept of theism then?
Yes. You can define henotheism again? Is that H-E-L-I?
Heno, H-E-N-O. Henotheism.
That's the belief that
there's a supreme being and other lesser beings. And that is the predominant form of religion of the pre-Columbian, not pre-Columbian, the pre-European religious philosophy of Africa and Asia. Before the Europeans tried to come in and impose Orthodox religion, this is the dominant idea of religion.
What's the difference between a saint and a lowercase god?
I think that is the transference of the same kind of concept into Western religion. It's kind of probably mixed a little bit with the idea of ancestors also, of honored ancestors, which Kemet did have also. But not in the same way as practiced today, though, I should say that.
So is henotheism separate from polytheism?
Yes, polytheism is the idea that there are just many gods all over the place and they're all separate and they're all doing their thing. Henotheism says that there is one supreme being and it's connected to all the lesser ones. And the lesser ones are just doing the work for the supreme being, but locally. So then, therefore, you can have a local divinity for your town, and that's as viable as someone else's local divinity in their town. And if you worship the local divinity and you go to the depth of that local divinity, you'll find the source of that divinity is in the supreme also. So therefore, that local divinity is not an absolute being either. You follow? So therefore, you cannot have that monotheistic ideal in this concept. The local divinity does not exist, in fact, forever, or for eternity, however you might want to see it. It's actually a temporary construct to sustain creation. That's what we call neteru. It's the same idea that you find in Yoruba, where you have the Olodumare, you have the supreme being, and then you have the lesser divinities as well. It's the same kind of concept, and we have shown also that the Yoruba religion was related to the Kemetic as well, so that's probably where many of the similarities come in.
With that, if it's okay with you, we'd like to take a short break, give you a chance to get up, take a restroom break. There are refreshments in the back for sale. We offer here live juices, 100% live organic juices. We have cantaloupe ginger in the back, if you've never tried that. And we have also live, we call it Melanin Paradise chocolate cake. 100% raw, live. So we're going to do that. We're going to reconvene in about, really by 9:30 we'll be back. And we're going to do it, you know. Yeah. We're going to see who's Mahanic in here. Alright, we get, we should walk around, stretch out a little bit.
This is the. Oh my lord. Okay.
Yeah, just took it.
No problem. This is what it used to be. So that's how we should have it sometimes. This is what it is. Yeah. That's fine. Because they can't do stuff. By and by.
So it's good.
No problem. We might go through a couple more, but yeah, that's, we're not it's just a different name. You have Kemet, you have Tamari, and Ta means land, and Tamari means middle. It's just a different name. And one we use black land. Here we call this place not a station.